Gone are the days when Tucker Carlson's nightly monologue set the agenda for the entire right. Now we find ourselves in an escalating war of influencers, trading conspiracies and counter-conspiracies, driving the right into all different kinds of rabbit holes and dead ends. So what are we going to do about it? Is this a problem that can be solved? And in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, is anyone going to step up to fill the role that Charlie filled as someone who could manage the coalition and guide people in the right direction? It seems that we are rolling into the winter holiday, and all of us have been ready to wind down. Some of us, I think both of us, have been pretty sick in a sort of fugue state. And it seems that the news is matching these subjective feelings. It feels like the news is rolling off. Everyone is like submitting their last big stories for the year. The administration is starting to, kind of slow down a little bit. And in one sense, it's good. I think everyone's exhausted from a very long year. But in another sense, it's actually quite bad because the void of real substantive news opens up the headlines for the most pointless, meaningless kind of psychodrama possible. And I've been observing this from, like under the covers, feeling very ill this last couple days.
You sound like it.
And just kind of marveling at it. And maybe you can help set us up. Like, where are we in the year? What is dominating the news, and how should we think about it?
These things might be related, actually. Because like you, it sounds like I've also been very sick and on a lot of meds. And I've been in this kind of like NyQuil, Sudafed induced, sort of febrile, like hypnagogic state for the last, week or so, sort of like coughing up a lung as I try to pay attention to what's going on. And I'm like scrolling through Twitter, trying to figure out what's going on. The best I can see, I mean, it seems like we are in these kinds of doldrums sort of politically. There's been a lot of inaction, not a lot sort of happening as a legislative matter, although, and I hope we can get to this at some point, there are real things happening in the administration. I've been seeing a lot of these executive orders sort of getting put into practice. Harmeet Dillon over at the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice has been making a lot of really interesting moves that we can talk about. There's been some immigration action, continued immigration action. So things are happening, but it does seem to be the case that the focus of everyone's attention is on politics, the show. Okay, politics as a soap opera, politics as a kind of interpersonal drama between various streamers and sort of charismatic figures, particularly on the right. It's hard to see if this same dynamic is playing out on the left. I don't think quite as much. I think the right is particularly prone to this kind of streamer alt media soap opera. So the real story here, the ongoing story here, and of course, this is based on something real. I don't want to be too glib or like facile about what's going on. I mean, a lot of this revolves around Charlie Kirk's assassination, the ongoing FBI investigation, and probably for very good reasons, the FBI has kept a relatively tight lid on their evidence and where their investigation has gone and the prosecution, and there are some gaps in the narrative, and we don't quite know what's going on between Tyler Robinson on the one hand, Lance Twiggs, who is his partner in crime, it appears. We don't know all of the details surrounding the planning of the assassination and everything else that might come to light once we have an actual trial, once we have actual charges on the table. And in the meantime, what we have instead are various people in this media ecosystem trying to fabricate what amount to sort of fantastical conspiracies to explain this, Ordinarily, I think I'd be mostly sympathetic to this, or at least my position would be, look, this is just kind of what people do. This isn't a big deal. People can hold sort of quasi beliefs in their head, and they maybe part believe the conspiracy theory while still keeping their feet grounded and sort of understanding that, no, the thing that we actually see in front of our faces is the thing that's happening. But this does seem to have the effect of, now with Candace Owens in TPUSA in particular, and now other people are getting involved in this sort of milieu, this matrix of various players. It's starting to break apart maybe the conservative coalition, the MAGA coalition. At least that's the fear. And so I guess the question we're trying to answer here is, does any of this matter? Does it make sense for us to continue talking about this and feeding further into the mania around these conspiracy theories, around whatever Candace Owens is saying about, French legionnaires and people in maroon shirts and Egyptian aircraft?
I can now report to you that it is a fact that on 9/4, there were, this was not some dropping by in Utah as they were trying to claim because the plane needed to be serviced. That's what they ran with. They ran with, this could have been a routine servicing. I guess there's just no place from Egypt all the way to Utah that an Egyptian military plane can get a tire changed. This is totally routine. Nothing to see here. Well, I'm telling you that for a fact, that plane was carrying military subcontractors. What's going on here? Why are Egyptian military subcontractors, what are Egyptian military subcontractors doing in the middle of Provo, Utah on the day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated?
This is all on its face absurd. And I really think anybody who's taking any of this seriously probably should not go anywhere near politics and should be very far away from power and can just be dismissed by serious people. However, it is having an effect. So is it nonetheless incumbent on us to say something about it? I don't know the answer to that. What do you think, Chris? Does this matter?
I think the correct approach is to avoid it as long as possible and to just ignore it. But there does come a point where one can no longer ignore it because it starts to have real world implications. And, some have suggested that this is tearing MAGA apart. It's breaking up the Trump coalition. It's going to lose the midterms. That's self-serving. That's hyperbolic. Mm-hmm. That's completely, completely wrong. But it does have an important function on the media ecosystem. And so the question is, what is the relationship between the kind of alt media, the kind of regular mainstream or gatekept media, the public as one segment, the audience, but then the broader political public, voters, et cetera, and then decision makers, the actual political elites, so governors, state senators, congressmen, the president, cabinet members. Yeah. And so you have to look at it that way. And I think where this is really an acute problem is somewhere in the middle. Look, I was just at a big event this weekend with the governor of Iowa and Iowa state legislators. We launched this new academic research center at the flagship state university, and none of them were worried about Candace Owens or Tim Pool or whatever e-drama was happening. Yeah. I mean, they were actually just laser focused. And the governor had been to the state football game. She had been opening this research center. They're talking about the budget, taxes. They're focused on real world political issues. But there is, and I think there's some reason to talk about it, this middle stratum of media that is the connection between the audience, the political elites, and then the people who are shaping the stories. And this does have a real effect. And so it has this splintering effect where the guys who are now running Turning Point, they're feeling frustrated. They're feeling like they need to respond. Other people in the media ecosystem, some of people are kind of cowering. I think it's fair to say some people don't want to offend any other, big voices with big audiences.
Right.
Others are sensing a payday, both in terms of audience or monetization, and they're jumping into, who can chase the conspiracy theory as far as possible.
Yeah.
And then there are some people who I think rightly are saying, wait a minute, we have to have an internal debate here. There has to be a forcing function, because if you look at the Charlie Kirk assassination, yes, I mean, I guess in some sense there's small gaps. There's more to learn. All of the facts haven't been divulged. But the facts that have been divulged seem to me dispositive. It seems, fairly obvious. You have the weapon, you have video, you have identification, you have some sort of DNA or forensic material left on the scene. You have a confession. You have the parents who recognized the picture and turned the son in. And so you have, I think, a pretty clear, provided that nothing has been totally fabricated, which I think is hard to believe. That would require a massive interagency conspiracy. And look, I'm not a big gun guy, but I've done some long range target shooting as a complete novice, and I was hitting targets reliably after a day of training at 600 yards. Yeah. And so the idea that 150 yards for someone who grew up shooting rifles is some sort of magic shot just doesn't stand up to reason to me. And in fact, it doesn't take much. Climb on a roof, go undetected, take the shot. Sadly, it is, doesn't require Egyptian surveillance planes and French paratroopers. Yeah. It requires someone who is just motivated, radicalized, and wants to take the shot. And so I think the real damage here, and what we should discuss, and I'd be curious how you look at it, is if the media represents the right's brain, the right's self-consciousness, and it is now being consumed by this, much like a fever, right?
Yeah.
We're in this fever state. It does damage to the right's thinking apparatus. And so we have to figure a way to either stop it, to cure it, to move beyond it.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it goes both directions, because rather than say that it creates damage, I would say it's a symptom of damage. It's indicative of a kind of breakdown of this epistemic grounding that that sort of would otherwise prevail in this case, a kind of commitment to evidence and reason and all the things that we'd sort of hope most people would pay attention to derive their opinions from and sort of make analytical claims based off of. I mean, that's always a bit of a fantasy. There's always some element in which the larger audience is going to be consumed by the sort of fantasy of what's happening in the world. And okay, I want to let me try to break this down into a few different parts, because one question I'm asking myself is what might we be trying to accomplish by interjecting into this conversation? Are we trying to change people's minds? I don't really think so. I don't think you can really do that. I think these are people who are starting from the premise that anything they hear that supports the quote unquote official narrative is already and presumptively a lie. And you see this all the time in sort of conspiratorial thinking. There's the term for this is epistemic closure. There's a kind of way in which any outside evidence that might contradict your theory about Egyptian planes or people in maroon shirts, or maybe Kash Patel says something that contradicts your conspiracy theory, the way you deal with that countervailing information is just to say, okay, the person who's supplying that information is in on it himself. So the person giving me this information is himself a Fed. So us merely having this conversation means that we're somehow in on it. We're doing the bidding of the official narrative makers. And so I don't think that there's a way that you can really sort of convince people who are already committed to the idea that what they're hearing from official information sources is untrue. I also just want to push back briefly on the idea that this doesn't matter or this can't potentially affect like elections. And while people in Iowa, for example, like the people you were talking to might not be paying attention to this stuff, and even if the underlying sort of fundamentals, the underlying information environment doesn't support, whatever these people are saying, it's like in the stock market. Once enough people are sort of infested with this kind of fear or exuberance, it can go both directions, right? In a market, that mania can lead to price movements, really dramatic price movements on any given asset, okay? And that can happen over, a course of a relatively long period of time. And if you, and there's a phrase in economics, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. In other words, just being right on the fundamentals doesn't really matter if the audience has been taken in by a mania one way or the other. And that can certainly hold true for elections too. Elections operate on a very similar kind of psychology. And so even if there's nothing there, if there is the perception that the right is breaking apart, that it's dysfunctional, that the MAGA coalition cannot stand up to the scrutiny of people like Candace Owens asking pointed questions about, the FBI's investigation of Charlie Kirk, and maybe TPUSA is in on it. And this starts to have some real sort of force of sort of psychological influence on a large enough group of people, it can actually deter people from voting. It can actually have a negative effect. So I don't want to dismiss it out of hand as being irrelevant. Then there's, okay, so if we take...
Let me jump in because there's a counter argument to that. Before we jump into the counter argument, let's take a word from our sponsors, then we'll talk about why Lomez might be wrong on this question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Lomez, the holidays are coming up, and you might be making preparations for different parties and festivities at the house. What will you be serving this holiday season to your guests?
Well, of course, I will be serving Flying Ace bourbon, as you know. That is the bourbon of choice in the Lomez household. I've been drinking a lot of Flying Ace lately, as has the wife. Not too much, but enough to keep us, happy and warm. We've been making ourselves some hot toddies with a nice little cinnamon stick, and we will be preparing some homemade eggnog over the next couple of weeks with Flying Ace. It is the perfect bourbon, simple, no nonsense. The taste is great. So that's what we have in our closet. That's what we'll be drinking.
That sounds great. Yeah, we'll be doing the same in the Rufo household, and we highly recommend it. It's a great bourbon. It's made by great people. It's an all-American brand, and you know that you're not giving your cash to some DEI woke corporation. So head on over to flyingacespirits.com and use the promo code BLAZE for free shipping. Get it done now so you can have it for the holidays and have a beautiful Christmas and a happy new year.
Okay, why am I wrong, Chris?
Yeah. So why are you wrong? Well, you might be, and so because I just don't want to give it too much power or overvalue it. And I think we have actually an experiment, and the experiment was Kanye West's presidential campaign. Remember, Kanye West was running for president.
Yeah,
and he was basically a magnet to the same kind of conspiratorial thinking. And in fact, his political or kind of pseudo-political conversion was initiated by Candace Owens. And so there is a similarity there. But Kanye's fame is multiple orders of magnitude greater than Candace Owens's fame. In theory, his potential influence or audience or voter base is, again, multiple orders of magnitude greater. But these are like sideshows that I don't think alter the fundamental dynamics of the general population or the general vote class of voters. And it had no perceptible impact on the election. And even, Trump was able to say, all right, Kanye has gone insane. We're just going to bracket him and move him out. Even if previously Kanye was brought into the White House because Trump felt that it might add to the campaign. So maybe my counter thesis is these things don't actually matter at scale quite yet. They could in theory, but they do matter in the middle part of the system, which is they do matter for people who are playing the inside baseball. They do suck up attention on media, and therefore it's an opportunity cost. But I'm just like, I just don't want to give these people too much credit. I don't want to like buy into their sense of their own, destiny that, Candace Owens is engaging in some investigation and it's going to blow it all apart. And, it's like, I don't, essentially, I guess I'm saying I don't want to buy into the kind of fever swamps and give them credit where credit may not be due.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, let me try to reframe it this way, which is I don't think we're necessarily giving them credit. What we're observing is there is a kind of power vacuum on the right in terms of the media environment. Who sets the script for what the average, person on the right, the average MAGA person believes about any given issue or believes about the world? On the left, this has a very clear sort of like hierarchical structure, ironically, actually. The left has, authorities. They have trusted spokespeople, trusted influencers who have the power. They have academics. They have sort of experts. They still have retained maybe some for the best, also for the worst. I think it's caused a lot of problems for them to be so committed to this sort of hierarchical structure and leads them in a lot of wrong directions. Nonetheless, they have a kind of hierarchical structure that creates a script. And if you are just like your average, middle class, liberal person somewhere in America working your white collar job, you turn on NPR in the morning or you watch maybe not even MSNBC, you just turn on like the nightly news on CBS or CNN. You hear a consistent and clear idea about what your opinions ought to be about the world. Here are the correct opinions about immigration. Here are the correct opinions about, diversity. Here are the correct opinions about transgenderism. And yes, okay, a year ago we said X about transgenderism. We've now changed our mind, and you should actually think this other thing Y. But as a good, dutiful liberal and a person who just follows the rules and you obey authority, you're going to believe these things. The right used to have kind of something like this. The right has always been more distributed, more disintermediated. There hasn't been as clear a hierarchy. We don't have a quote unquote real expert class. We never really had the same kinds of power of, like mainstream media to sort of enforce our own script. And this has created a lot of problems. It's created a kind of diffuse sort of ideological landscape for the right. We don't really know what we believe, or all these different nodes believe something different, and these are constantly coming into conflict. That kind of diffusion, that kind of disintermediation has only accelerated over the last, few years. I think there's really good things about this. This has allowed us the power to sort of have a lot of creative and interesting voices enter into the conversation and gain influence who previously did not have that influence. This has led to new ideas around things like immigration that would have previously been disallowed under the old system. However, it's created some confusion about what people are supposed to believe. Like, I don't think, modal average people with right-leaning instincts really know where to go to get their information. Who are the voices of authority? Nobody's really quite clear about this. It is unsettled territory. And what's taking over is this kind of conspiratorial soap opera. The politics as a show, it's purely drama, and that's come in place of actual news. And so what do we do about that? I'm not really sure. I don't have a clear answer, but I think, okay, that's my diagnosis about a lot of what's going on here.
I think that there is a lot of truth to that, but it wasn't always this way, and this transition has been rather recent. I remember back to the first Trump administration, to those 4 years, a little bit beyond that. The right actually did have a unifying script, a Schelling point where all of the major narratives kind of fought for primacy. Some were sorted out, some were sorted in. and it was the Tucker Carlson Tonight show.
Yeah.
And it was the 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. Those first 10 minutes or so where Tucker would deliver his monologue was the script for the right. And it was always, spot on, the majority position. I think always, more often than not, well considered, strongly argued, and then you'd go into interviews to substantiate it or flesh it out. But it did feel that Tucker had really kind of either ridden the narrative or cohered the narrative. Just he had the narrative power, and everyone basically agreed. Tucker is kind of the person to listen to. He's summarizing how we all think, how we all feel. And he was also translating Trump. Trump is narratively actually a pretty confusing character. He has his own idiosyncrasies, his own personality, of course, his own drama, his own way of writing, which is very entertaining, but also prone to tangents and petty grievances and kind of minor themes. But Tucker was able to assimilate all of these various energies so that a kind of MAGA mom in Alabama and a think tank employee in DC and a blue state, Silicon Valley conservative could all basically come together and say, yeah, this is more or less where we're going. Tucker's, exit from Fox News, and also at the same time, a technological change where broadcast news, that 5 o'clock broadcast news slot with Jesse Waters, relative to social media is now less powerful.
Yes.
It's an older audience. It's a smaller audience. And more audiences are getting kind of bottom-up information from social media. And you have all of these things converging along with this very rough period of the Biden years with COVID, censorship, the catastrophic failures of the expert class, causing a lot of distrust. And so now we're in this very bizarre position where there really isn't a single person dominating the narrative. And even the president of the United States is not offering a day-to-day coherent narrative that the public can latch on to. He seems in a lot of ways kind of a secondary figure. With not a primary figure, but the absence of a primary figure. And so everyone is vying for this spot. And I don't think that the kind of internet tier dramatists or meta dramatists are filling that.
No.
But they're each patching a hole. They're each staking out some small territory. And without any real remedy. That's the other problem with this, is that the left, for all its faults, has a structure and a method. The right, for all of the good and for all of the new voices that have made an entry into this system, and again, which is overall, I think, good. You want to have more freedom of entry. You want to have more creative debate. You want to have a wider range of opinion that was permitted maybe versus 10 years ago. But we are kind of going to the lowest common denominator. And what I think is like, and we'll roll the clip. I mean, it's essentially ends up with people yelling at each other.
Yeah.
So let's see how Tim Pool, one of the other kind of digital commentators, is handling the situation.
This is what happens after Charlie Kirk is killed. Candace Owens is a evil scumbag. She is a degenerate. She is burning everything down, and she's gloating and smiling while she does it. And you know what you told me? She has no security. She doesn't deal with the we have to deal with. She's a piece of She's making everyone else suffer. And all of these conservatives out there that send me these messages have no fucking balls to call her out. More and more people have started doing it. They send me these messages. Good for you, Tim. Good for you, Tim. I wasn't the first person to do it. I'm not going to take credit for that. But don't DM me like I did something for you as you cower, scared that she'll put you on her thumbnail and claim you benefited from Charlie Kirk's assassination, which he's doing to me right now.
I see that clip, and do you know the aristocrats joke? Okay, it's like some absurd, vulgar joke, and then at the end they say the aristocrats. I see that clip and I want to declare democracy. Okay, this is sort of what I have in mind. I think this kind of populist energy, as unsettled as it is just a kind of baseline feature of a democratic system. And that's okay. I think that's fine. I am actually not despairing about this current sort of state of the media, the alt media on the right. Like you, I think it's a good thing. Like you, I sort of miss having Tucker Carlson's monologue every night on Fox, kind of establishing the mood for the right, establishing the script for the right. I will say a guy who was doing that, of course, and I think would have been the obvious successor was Charlie Kirk. And I don't, part of what I think might be going on here is we lost what people were starting to kind of coalesce around in Charlie as that figure who could kind of speak on behalf of the different parts of this coalition. What we have now are people speaking on the individual aspects of it, but nobody really grabbing that center. Nobody with the kind of charisma or understanding of the coalition at large that can bring all these people together, that understands the kind of fundamental instincts that are animating the MAGA coalition. I think Charlie was that figure. It should be said, one commonality here is Blake Neff. Blake Neff, who wrote for Tucker Carlson, wrote the monologue for Tucker Carlson every night, then went and was writing for Charlie Kirk. You can see Blake Neff now. He's doing some of the radio and TV spots where Charlie was previously. Great guy, really smart. But what we're missing is the combination of that understanding of the coalition that someone like Blake Neff has and the charismatic communicator who just by sheer force of will and a certain understanding of just people, someone who's likable, someone who has a kind of optimistic and positive energy can bring all these people together. We just don't have that. And so what I'll say is the reason I'm not pessimistic is because I think, in any environment that's sort of new, I've likened this to imagine a forest fire. A fire comes in and burns down the forest and all the old growth is gone. And there's this period of ecological transition as the new growth comes in, and a lot of weird and interesting things and different kinds of species and can come up in this interim period until the new sort of stable growth emerges after, let's say, a catastrophic earthquake or volcano or anything else. So I think there's something like that happening here in our media system. We're just in this strange transition time, that stable growth that can come out and sort of build on top of that last sort of cataclysm just hasn't had time to take root yet. We will get there eventually, however. So I remain optimistic.
Everyone knows that college is a major investment, so it's important to do your research. You want to find a school that not only is great at academics, but also shares your values. Lomez, where would you start your search these days?
Yeah, it's such a tough question. I get asked this all the time. I, of course, used to teach at a major university for 10 years, and it's not a place I would send my kids. And so where do you go? One resource that I found that's really useful is christiancollegeguide.com. That's christiancollegeguide.com. It's free. It's a directory of over 250 Christian colleges and universities. This really is a one-stop shop. You can find out everything you need to know about tuition, about acceptance rates, about majors. There's information, of course, about the school's faith commitments, campus policies, its spiritual life, all of the things that are going to matter to you and your child. This really is the definitive guide to Christian higher education, and it's completely free. So if you or someone you know is considering college, go to christiancollegeguide.com, create a free user profile, and get started today. That's christiancollegeguide.com.
Yeah, and it isn't amazing. I think your point about Blake is so interesting because and Charlie, I think, who was serving that same function, but Charlie also understood, okay, you have to actually draw boundaries as well. And so Turning Point, they had all these events, conferences, people. it was an unwieldy coalition to manage, just as administratively for the organization, but then coalitionally for the broader right. And he also was a tough person. He had principles. He knew what he should accept, where he should bend, where he should make exceptions, but then where he should draw the line. And then sometimes where he should change, where he should say, we drew the line here, but in fact, maybe it's better to go here. He was actually very good at managing that and delineating that, and he had the courage to do it, and he did it in a very persuasive way. He was a great speaker, very charismatic individual, extremely hardworking to get the message out there. And we don't have that, which is too bad. But in another sense, it only takes one person or a small group of people at most. And so there's a huge opening. I've been so far a bit surprised that the vice president hasn't tried to step into this role. I think that he would be, have the charisma and then have the authority. I mean, the vice presidency of the United States, like pretty actually good, a good position to have, to be a leader in this conversation. But he too has seemed to be very shy about it.
That's
I wonder why. I've known JD over the years, really like JD, but I'm kind of surprised he hasn't tried to step into it. It does feel like he has some hesitation or maybe even some fear. How do you read it from the outside?
I think he could. I think JD has all of the tools and charisma, and he's got the right talking points, and he can speak to different aspects of the coalition, and he'd be very good at it. However, I actually disagree that being the vice president, I think, actually precludes you in some way from being able to take on that role, especially in an environment that's so chaotic like right now. Just sort of, it's like the kids, you have a lot of kids, when they're like acting crazy, you want to like come in as the father. Okay, everybody stop. You go to your room for a little while and you kind of shut everything down, and there's this restart, and you establish like a new tone, a new mood for, how the rest of the afternoon is going to go. I don't think JD Vance should actually do that in his vice presidential position. Not right now. I think it'd be a bit presumptuous. I think people might kind of see it as him stepping in to sort of correct a situation that I think needs to just happen organically. JD can't speak candidly about the administration, and whoever is going to step into this role has to feel like credible to this audience. And part of that credibility is going to come from just speaking honestly about all of these different things happening in this ecosystem, whether it's the different personalities, the ideas, the sort of ideology that's animating Trump, but also the specific actions that the Trump administration is taking. And I think JD can get close. I think he could probably say a lot of things, but there are other things he can't say that only someone on the outside can say. So, maybe it could be maybe we could do a kind of like fireside chat thing, and maybe there could be some equivalent to that, and it's some combination of JD Vance. But also Donald Trump's still in charge. Okay, Donald Trump is still, the guy at the top, and for JD Vance to take on this role also assumes a certain authority that might not sit well inside of this coalition, given his, positioning relative to Donald Trump at the top.
It's interesting. And I think that Trump, though, feels, and maybe it's a generational question, he feels checked out from this. I think he is like a creature of the television ultimately.
Yeah.
And he watches Fox. When we had our Somali story, he was watching Fox.
Right.
And then like spun into action. And so Trump is a creature of the television. And we're talking about something that is different and something that is social media driven, where Trump, of course, has succeeded, but he has somewhat pulled back from that. And then gone into the Truth Social silo, which is just kind of a Trump replication machine. And isn't like in podcast world, it's just not his natural habitat. And so, yeah, maybe you're right that we need some sort of native figure to step up in the same way that Charlie Kirk did, in the same way that, Tucker had done. But I am not sure that that is possible given just how digital works and
maybe how fragmented we are.
Yeah, you're. It's like, well, we need to have the Beatles.
Yeah.
When you have Spotify, like, well, no, actually, you can't have the Beatles when you have Spotify. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You can't even have Blink 182. And maybe that's good. I don't think we need Blink 182 again. So, okay, well, let's move on. Let's talk about another story. Let's beat up on Europe. Because that's if we're having a hard time on the right, we have to have a scapegoat.
We need an enemy.
Let's just choose. Yeah, we need.
Actually,
we need
let me just say this because this is actually an important point. We will transition to this, but like not having the left and beating up on the left as the Schelling point is also part of this problem.
Yeah,
we don't have a common enemy that we can just point to every day and be like, look what they're doing. That's insane. And we can all rally around the insane things the left are doing. The left's out of power. The left is lost. They don't have any real like sense of narrative of their own. They're not really trying to accomplish anything. They're kind of dead in the water. So yeah, we need an enemy. Why not the EU? Okay. Yes. Let's go.
Okay. So let's do it. This is the EU beatdown hour. So the European Union, and I guess they announced this and they were trying to make a big show of it. What they've, instead of actually innovating and having great high technology companies and having a free enterprise system that generates economic growth, they seem to have resolved on a solution of just taxing and fining American tech corporations. Yeah. And so the latest was this, multi-million-dollar fine against Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter, for some, I didn't even really know, like some violation. They said that the blue check system that Elon has done violates some European principles. It's like, it's so nonsensical.
Okay,
it's not even really worth analyzing.
There were three pieces of it. One is that the blue check system wasn't legitimate because you couldn't tell who was getting a blue check and why. I mean, again, it's like totally ridiculous. The other one had something to do with ad transparency. So the ad system wasn't properly transparent. And then the third one, which I find funny, is X was no longer giving free access to their data to these like disinformation researchers. And so, the EU thought this was, they couldn't countenance not having all of this free information so they could do their disinformation research. So that was the ostensible three pillars of this fine.
Yeah. And exactly. And so, they've seemed to have made this into a big thing. I mean, they're finding Apple, they're finding Microsoft, they're finding all of the American tech companies. They had previously their privacy regulations, the kind of European zone privacy regulations. And look, I think it's a really interesting problem because you have global technology, and you see this in at the EU. You see it also in China, where many of these tech firms are essentially firewalled, where you can't have access, like reciprocal access to the Chinese market with digital technologies. Although we've given them and still give them free access through TikTok to the American market. And so it's a very interesting geopolitical question. But with Europe, it seems particularly frustrating because, in one sense, Europe should be our closest ally. Of course, America is a nation descended from Europeans predominantly. America was built on European principles that were translated to the New World and unshackled from the feudal past. That was the idealistic story we were telling ourselves. And now we're looking back, and it does seem like a remnant of that. The kind of European feudal mindset where it's not creative, it's not innovative, but they're just trying to like tax the American peasants and harvest some cash from American ingenuity.
Yeah, so this is an interesting, there's that argument, right, that the EU is using this as a kind of cynical, backdoor to generate tax revenue, and they don't really care about any of the details. This is just about sort of punishing these companies, not really punishing these companies, but just extracting some value from them. I mean, it's just a sort of very plain racket that they're running, a kind of protection racket that they're running. But there is an interesting sort of free speech angle here. And there's been this ongoing tension in how we preserve American free speech norms on these digital platforms that operate globally. And the central tension goes something like this. Like the United States, our First Amendment is much stronger and much more robust than free speech norms anywhere else, including Europe, including our closest cousins, like legal cousins like England. Obviously, we have a kind of presumption of free speech. They don't. Their presumption is that speech is regulable, and there isn't this sort of like burden of proof, this really high burden of proof for any reason why you would restrict speech like we have here. So what we don't have, however, are strict freedoms that prevent private companies from moderating free speech. So like our legal system treats the state as like the main censor, but we live in a world now where pretty much all speech, like the public square, is happening on these private platforms, on things like Twitter, Facebook, etc. And the state can't really interfere on the moderation of those private platforms. Those private platforms can kind of do whatever they want. They can have more or less whatever moderation policies they want. So how do we preserve free speech norms? And especially even the companies that want to have maximal free speech on these private platforms, because Europe, China, Brazil, wherever it might be, are going to demand by force of legal consequence, by force of these large fines, or even just shutting down the platforms, that they adhere to European more strict speech requirements. The default for these companies, in order to avoid liability, is to adhere to the most strict speech norms. So, like Facebook and Twitter forever have just adhered to European speech norms. And so what previously happened, this is kind of an interesting thing that's happened over the last 10 years. Like when Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State in 2012, she had this thing called the Internet Freedom Agenda. And the Internet Freedom Agenda was, we are not going to adhere to European speech norms. We are going to enforce American speech norms on these other countries if they want to use our platforms. And a lot of this was driven by what we were doing like in the Arab Spring. And the idea was democracy is dependent on people being able to say whatever they want. There's this great line from this guy, Martin Gurri, who said, they wanted the Arab Spring in Tunisia, but what they got was the Arab Spring in the United States. Okay, what they got instead was Donald Trump, and they got Brexit, and they got people during COVID, for example, pushing back. Okay, exactly. And so all of a sudden they switched gears and they started talking about disinformation. And you had these very prominent legal experts like Cass Sunstein and this guy, Jack Goldsmith, writing these, articles about how actually, you know what, America needs to live by European speech codes and we have something to learn from them. And our companies ought to be more like European companies. And so now finally, with X being bought by Elon Musk, by our new sort of people in power at State. J.D. Vance gave this great speech in Germany about this last October.
A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
We have our wonderful, beautiful Undersecretary of State, Sarah Rogers, has spoken about this recently. We are going to go back, ironically enough, to the Hillary Clinton model of an open internet and start demanding that these places open up their speech codes and allow our companies to enforce American First Amendment style free speech across these platforms wherever they are operating.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if that will succeed. I wonder if what will happen eventually is just a great geofencing, so that there's a patchwork of different regulations and kind of national level censorship models, where these companies essentially adapt to local conditions. I don't think that's the ideal solution. I think a more open internet globally, which is in line with, again, the idealistic vision of the internet when it was founded, would be superior. But it just seems like maybe that ship has sailed. And again, like any great vision, it makes contact with reality. Reality is messy, and then the great powers are fighting it out. So we'll see how that resolves over time.
When you're saying you're saying there's going to be this geofencing, are you saying this as like a descriptive matter, or are you saying this is how it ought to be? In other words, because I'm sort of two minds about this.
No, just descriptively. Yeah, I mean, ideally we would have, like, for X, for example, there would be a policy like Elon has adopted of speech with some restrictions. Obviously, you can't, call for assassinations. You can't, there are calls, threats to violence, et cetera. I think that doxing, I think, is a reasonable policy to say, hey, wait, there are some limitations, some restrictions. That's inevitable. Would I like it to be globally, like, for example, in Brazil or the EU? Yes, of course. But ultimately, these countries have the power to shut off service, right? And so there is, I think, just inevitably going to be some negotiation and some kind of national level concessions. Again, not ideally, but don't you think that's eventually how it's going to be?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. Let me just push back on this a little bit, because
I mean, China has already done so. So we know that at least one power is effectively firewalling off these technologies completely. It seems like impossible. I think the idea was that the technology transcended national boundaries and therefore could not be regulated by national or subnational institutions. But in fact, that hasn't proven to be true.
I think it definitely can. I think these countries, like, we very well could have a situation in which X operated differently in the United States than it does in Germany, than it does in England and Saudi Arabia and everywhere else.
We have that now, right?
Yeah. And so, okay, so now let me just push back a little bit and say this. Like, why are we trying to impose American First Amendment norms, American speech norms on the rest of the world? And I'll say, like, this is good for America, and I'm glad we have it. But if, Saudi Arabia wants to have their more constrained speech norms, and China wants to have its speech norms, and England wants to have its, and Germany wants to have its, well, that's up to Germany, that's up to China, that's up to Saudi Arabia. Why should we? Because the reason I ask this is because while I think it's good, one sort of foreign policy or kind of just conceptual lesson, I think, from the last 30, 50, maybe, the history of the world is different peoples have different ways of governing themselves, different ways of organizing their societies, and trying to impose a sort of single ways of being on all the peoples of the world is a mistake. And we shouldn't actually expect Saudi Arabia to operate effectively as a country, given the makeup of its people, according to the same laws and norms that America has. And so what? So what if there are constrictive speech codes in places like England or Germany?
No, I agree. That's kind of the point that I was trying to make, which was, this seems inevitable. It doesn't seem like there's any way of avoiding it, and perhaps it's not necessarily bad. And again, I don't know if there is, let's take Saudi Arabia as the example. It's like, yeah, I don't know actually if it's in America's best interest for Saudi Arabia to have, American style free speech policies. That actually might actually be bad, might undermine the stability of the country, might make our alliance more difficult. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see the kind of patchwork nature of the internet coming into being. And I think the red line that we have to draw is in our home territory.
Yes.
Saying no other system will impinge on our territory. If the Germans want to have us take down posts in the United States because it violates their law, the Germans can pound sand, and we're not going to. And I think, look, the government too, I think the Trump administration should go hard on these fines and say, hey, on behalf of our great technology companies, we're not paying these fines. And actually play chicken with these people a little bit, because they can't just milk our companies for cash. Okay, final story. This is a fun one. It's a culture one. The New York Times, of all places, had a decent article about AI writing. Yeah. And the idea that AI writing is bland, uninspiring, flat, one-dimensional, because the nature of AI, it smooths out all the differences. It smooths out all of the idiosyncrasies, and it adopts the kind of median tone of writing, professional writing, technical writing, pop culture writing. Even if you ask the AI to adopt a certain tone, it will do so in a inevitably derivative way. First question, do you use AI on a frequent basis? How do you use it? And have you noticed this problem?
Yeah, so real quick, the article was written by Sam Criss, and credit where credit's due. Sam Criss is a good writer. And so one interesting thing about the article is he sort of front loads it with like AI writing, and then he transitions into his own writing. And you can see like this very clear difference between what a good writer looks like versus what AI writing looks like. And so, okay, I think AI writing has a use case, and I do use it, although I've been finding myself using it less and less rather than more and more. So when I first started experimenting with ChatGPT, I thought, oh, here's like a good way for me to write these like random emails. You have to go through hundreds of emails and you want them to sound sort of like professional and have a certain polish. And actually the goal is to erase your personality from certain kinds of writing. And there are certain kinds of writing where the intention actually is to erase the personality from it. You want it to be as neutral as possible. And in those cases, I think it can be useful, although it still needs a human touch, because the trick is, while you want it to have the sort of polish of AI writing, you don't want it to be transparently obvious that it is AI writing. That turns people off. That suggests that you're like cutting corners, that you're not involved. And it's actually like a signal of incompetence in some sense. It's the default sound or voice of people who don't have talent, who can't do things on their own. So in some way,
it's also disrespect to your interlocutor, right? It's saying you're not worth writing an actual email to. I'm delegating that to a computer.
That's right. That's right. So it shows like, this lack of care, etc. But it's becoming the default voice of stupidity. Okay, it's like the baseline now, above which anybody who can write like at a level above that now has more value. So there's this interesting thing happening where AI has replaced the need for like the lowest or like mid-tier level of communicator. What it's done is radically increased the value of anybody who can write sort of like above that baseline voice. And so one thing is happening is it's becoming increasingly common and increasingly easy to see, especially if you use it. It starts to become really obvious, and it's everywhere. I am seeing it everywhere. I am seeing it in published books. I am seeing it or hearing it in like tons of ad copy, even for really prominent companies that obviously have huge marketing departments. They're leaning on like these sort of tripartite, like adjectival phrases There's the it's X, not Y, or it's not X, it's Y construction. There's all these like sort of syntactical signals that are giveaways. But it's also making me attuned to people who can write really well. And I find myself gravitating towards those people. So I think I will still use it. It's very useful as a research tool. I think it's very helpful and sort of aggregating a lot of information, distilling it down into a few like useful points, and helping to construct sort of arguments and through lines, and maybe even inducing certain kinds of analysis that might have otherwise been sort of difficult to come by on your own. So I find it as a useful sort of brainstorming or thinking tool, but it's a terrible writer, frankly, and I don't use it for that much anymore. How about yourself?
Yeah, definitely not for writing, terrible writing. It's good for discovery. It's at least a good starting point for some discovery. I think for certain tasks, it's better than a Google search or a search engine search. And my hope with AI is that it would provide an undergraduate level research assistant. That was really my big hope. It's like, all right, can this essentially serve as a undergraduate level research assistant? And in some cases it can. So if you load it with a bunch of PDFs, you buy some books as PDFs, you load it into the system, you ask it to summarize the chapters or retrieve specific bits of information. Hey, figure out, all of the things related to what happened in 1763 in these 5 books, provide me page citations, just so you can speed up the identification, summarization, information retrieval. It does fairly well in that, maybe comparable to an undergraduate research assistant. But even on the information discovery, I found that it is like an unreliable undergraduate where it can summarize a lot. It can write you, things that seem fairly good, well. And then, of course, like an undergraduate research assistant, you double check the work and you realize that the AI like makes up 30% of the things that it's telling you. And so I think I still feel hopeful for it. I still feel that it is going to eventually replace Google search. The AI will become the default method of summarizing information, searching for information. And I recognize, of course, it's a technology that's still in its infancy. It seems like something that has huge potential. Yeah. But I just see it slowing down in its improvement. I see it still having some fundamental flaws that would prevent it from being a trustworthy object of delegation. Yeah. So delegating to an AI is like, man, you're going to really royally screw up a fairly high percentage of the time. And so maybe, I guess, if they build $500 billion or $1 trillion of data centers, maybe it will get there. But I think that I remain somewhat skeptical, reasonably skeptical. And I remain extremely skeptical of the AI doomers or AI fatalists who think that this is like going to take over the world and the machines are going to be controlling everything. It's like it can't even format citations. I think we're a long ways away from the AI, taking over the world.
What are we extrapolating from this? Because there's two different paths here. One path is, it's like chess. And eventually, because people said all the same stuff about chess when like Gary Kasparov was playing Deep Blue or whatever, the IBM computer, and they came to a draw. And the idea was, well, okay, yes, computers are really good at this, but still the best chess is going to be some combination of computers doing it with humans. There's going to be this human computer sort of merger, and that's going to be the best sort of chess player. Well, no, actually what happened was the computers just got much better than all the chess players. And now there's not a single chess player who can beat the best computer. And actually it's like not even close. Like computers are just forever going to be better than humans at this specific domain. So does that happen?
I think that will happen within domains that are comparable to chess, right? It's for the same reason that a great chess player is not necessarily great at everything, right? I think these computer programs that are relying on look, radiology, like reading laboratory slides, will be done better by a computer if it's not already the case. But there are certain kind of general tasks that require human creativity, human ingenuity. And I mean, we're not even close. So I guess it's like, will it replace call center employees? Yeah, probably. That'd be good. Will it replace like, TV writing, script writing? I'm a little bit more dubious about it.
So you're drawing the line at like creative enterprises. There's some like special quality of cognitive behavior that is creative, that's distinct from like some other technical kind of like cognitive
and it's not mathematically
activity.
reducible, right? It's not reducible to some sort of mathematical formula, and it's not reducible to the median answer, right? Okay, you're talking to Xfinity customer support. The AI can probably figure out, what your problem is and probably, help you in the majority of cases. But if you're talking about, some kind of artwork, I think at least the human being assisted by the computer is going to it's going to be able to do things and complex tasks that the AI will not be ready to do, at least in let's say the near to medium term. Long term, who knows? But I think the idea that, if we don't shut down all these servers, the AIs are going to take over the world in 6 months, just seems to me like not understanding how bureaucracies work, and then also overestimating the capacities in the medium term of the AI.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. This requires a more developed theory, but like any piece of art is fundamentally a manifestation of, or an expression of, like the human experience. And it requires a human to best understand that experience in order to articulate it. A computer is just not human, therefore it can only mimic it. It can only sort of like mirror that thing. It can't actually do it. So I guess, yeah, any domain where the value, the cash out, the thing we care about is an expression of a human experience is ultimately going to be done best by humans. What we might see, though, is the computer like starts cutting off or improving above what some percentage of humans can do in that regard. Yes. And so you're only left maybe by the end of this with like 0.001% of humans do it better than the computer, but there will always be some human doing it better, I suppose. That's like the hope.
Yeah, I think, look, it's like the tractor, the tractor replaced a lot of humans in agricultural work, and that's okay. And I think this will be kind of similar for cognitive work. And so will it disrupt things? Yeah, maybe, although I think so far we haven't seen it.
Okay, bottom line though, please, if you're listening to this, like stop using ChatGPT so much. It's really bad. It's really obvious when you use it. And the effect is, like, at least if I'm the reader, I respect you less.
A lot less.
It really makes me sort of like cringe and disregard whatever point you're trying to make. So please stay away.
I agree.
From
and if you're trying to
overuse.
be a writer and you find that ChatGPT is writing better than you are, another line of work is probably find another profession. So that's good. That's a public service announcement.
Right.
I think it's very important. And we'll see. Maybe ChatGPT. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it will replace all of us, but it won't replace us this week. That's for sure.